Welcome, everyone. I'm Wiwi Darmiasi from the Matsunaga Institute for Peace. Thank you for joining us today on our Careers in Peacebuilding Talk Story series. This event is also co-sponsored by Conflict and Peace Specialists at the University of Hawaiʻi at Manoa. Now I'd like to pass it over to our professor, Maya, who will be moderating today's session. Maya, please take it away.
Thank you. Mahalo, terima kasih, Wiwik. I'm really grateful to Wiwik Darmiasi and Jose Barsola for organizing and managing the tech and recording for this session. And thank you so much, Josh Crafford, for being here. So Josh is a very special individual who's committed his life to multifaceted learning and multiple intelligences. Professionally, he's played a leading role in conceptualizing and overseeing the creation of several international learning and development departments within Fortune 200 companies, such as GE Capital, Synchrony Financial, and others. Additionally, he serves as a strategic partner and guest lecturer for various universities, including the University of Hawaiʻi at Mānoa, University of Connecticut, University of Illinois, and Savannah College of Art and Design. Specializing in neurodivergent strengths and inclusion, he's co-led the first of its kind neurodiversity early career program and playbook with University of Connecticut and University of Illinois. He has been featured in multiple publications, including USA Today, and he has produced the documentary Blessed with Dyslexia and Neurodiversity. He holds a Master's of Art in Design Management and Innovation, and he obviously brings a very important and unique perspective wherever he goes, as he is neurodivergent himself. And this is an important time in our learning and growth and our education to think through, with a strength-based approach, the many things that neurodivergent people can contribute to our spaces of learning, to our companies, to our organizations, and to our communities. So mahalo, Josh, for being here and helping us to understand that so well.
Well, aloha, Maya, and thank you so much for having me. Very honored to be here and speak with everybody. And I love the fact that this topic is starting to gain more attention and people want to understand more about it, what it is, how they can help, and how to really building the inclusive cultures within organizations to support the employees that they currently have as well as other future employees. And then it just has a fantastic ripple effect, which if you build an inclusive culture for neurodivergent people, it's an inclusive culture for all, because no one should really have to disclose that they're neurodivergent. Therefore, you have to treat everybody with kindness and focus on their strengths.
Yes, absolutely. And again, the strengths are many, and we ought not to waste the precious human resources that we have. And so it benefits all, because we can find new solutions and creative pathways that we would not otherwise have. So I'm grateful to the beautiful neurodivergent people in my community. And I would love to ask you to start off, if you could share with us a little more about your personal journey and what brings you to this conversation today.
Sure. Thank you. So for me, I got to take you back to second grade when I was 7 years old, and I had difficulty reading and writing, and I was tested by the State Department of Education. And when the results came back, a representative came from the State Department of Education, called myself and parents into the school.
Joined the meeting.
And I sat in one room and they sat in the adjacent room, and I was with the teacher, and I couldn't understand a lot of the results that they were sharing. But the very last thing that person said, and to me, they're from the State Department of Education, so it's a person of authority. They summarized my future, and it was the strongest memory that I remember. And I confirmed this just a few years back with my mother, if I heard it right. And she said, "Oh my goodness, you heard that?" They said, "Josh might not graduate high school, and don't count on college." And that was based off of some standardized tests. And in talking with people recently, even, I just talked to someone this week, where kids are still being told the same thing. It depends on the school system. It depends on the teacher or the person, but there isn't enough education out there where your reading is incredibly important. I don't want to glaze over that, but your ability to read and do it quickly is not the basis of intelligence. There's so many different forms of intelligence and strengths and things that we can do. So fast forward, I had to learn to mask and hide the fact that I was dyslexic. I couldn't even pronounce dyslexic. So all the other kids were like, "Oh, yes, Cootie, stay away from him," because they didn't know what it was either. And in order to fit in, to mask and fit in, I became a class clown, and then that evolved into a practical joking punk. And the other practical joking punks that I was hanging out with were unfortunately starting to get expelled by the time we were freshmen in high school. And my favorite teacher was Mr. Holden. He was our science teacher, and he was a practical joker himself. And on April Fool's Day, I proudly superglued him to his stool. I thought it would be funny, and I guess I took it too far. My entire class saw me do it. And he remained seated the entire class. Our class was the last period of the day. So luckily he only had to wait until our class got out, and then he could figure out how to remove himself from his stool. But what he did the next day when we all came back to school, after first period got out, all of the students from first period flooded into the hallway, and it was a manhunt to find out who superglued Mr. Holden to his stool. And this continued to happen throughout the day. And when it was time for our class, Mr. Holden walked in, and he greeted all of us, and he said, "Congratulations, you are the coolest group of freshmen that I've ever met. Because as you can see on the board behind me are all of your names written on the board, and then 150 points of extra credit to whoever the first person is that turns in the culprit that superglued me to my stool yesterday." And no one turned me in. So Mr. Holden said, if the person that you are all protecting does not turn themselves in the next 3 seconds, everybody here gets detention. So I was like, "I'm sorry, crap, Mr. Holden, I did it." And he brought me into the hallway, and he gave me two options. But before he gave me those two options, he gave me the best gift ever. He reframed the way that I looked at myself for the very first time as a voice of authority outside of that voice in the second grade. He said, "Look, if this was first period and someone had turned you in, I would have simply expelled you and you would have been gone. No questions asked. But as the day went on and no one turned you in, I started to wonder why. And then I realized you have leadership skills." And then he said, "I also realized you're the first student in 20 years to successfully prank me on April Fool's Day, and students have tried every single year. So you must have some creativity skills as well." And then he gave me the two options. He said, "Option one is take your leadership skills and creativity skills and promise me you'll put them to good use and promise me you'll go to college." And honestly, at that point, I had zero intention of going to college because I had given power to that voice of authority in the second grade that said, "Don't even bother." So I asked him, I said, "So what's option number two?" And he looked me dead in the eye and he said, "Crafford, I expel your ass. You took it too far." And I still get goosebumps remembering that to this day, because I liked him and I respected him, and I had to re-look at myself, and I took his advice. And luckily I played sports. So I started finding friends on my sports teams that wanted to go to college, and we formed study groups. And my GPA, I went back and I have my high school transcript. My GPA at the end of my freshman year was a 1.9, which is a D. Because of my friends in these study groups and them teaching me in non-traditional ways, we would talk story, and we would tie things back to personal experiences, and we would do teach backs. And my GPA went from a 1.9 freshman year to a 2.4 sophomore year. And then from a 2.4 sophomore year to a 3.1 junior year. And then it hovered at about a 3.1 because that was about as good as I could do. But also because I was taking sports more seriously, I was captain of sports teams. I was vice president of my senior class, and I was volunteer student of the year. And I guarantee you, any neurodivergent people know they have to do more than just the typical things, and they are going to be your hardest workers, and they're going to raise their hand, and they're going to try and do things that other people are fearful of, because we've spent our whole lives figuring out the systems and patterns and ways around it, and failing and learning from those failures and moving on. So I did go back after I went to college. I went to college in Hawaii. I grew up on the mainland. And the only place I applied was Hawaii, because for me, school still wasn't fun. And it was where I was going to school was what was going to keep me in school. Because if my grades dropped or if I dropped out, I'd have to move back to the mainland. And just life's been a fantastic journey since then in learning how to learn, but then also sharing that with others. And that's how I turned it into a fantastic career.
Well, and to your point, the importance of having one person who challenges you, who believes
Yes.
in your capacity to do more than you've demonstrated before, is really critical, I think. So, that, yes, you're going to work harder, provided there is somebody who has some faith in you and who's able to recognize your intelligence and talent in the midst of perhaps behavior that is, that is survival behavior for someone who has not necessarily been lauded and applauded, academically and in school, formal schooling spaces, right? So
Yeah.
I think the most important message, I think, perhaps coming from is that we have to be able to champion, and advocate, and to recognize that strength where perhaps it isn't obvious in some of our organizations and community spaces. And thank you for sharing that story. As a neurodivergent person, but also as someone who specializes in the strengths of neurodivergent people, can you speak a little bit more about the unique qualities that neurodivergent individuals bring to workplace? You've already alluded to that a little bit in the sense of, there are folks who have been able to creatively work around problems, and who are industrious, who are accustomed to feeling that failure, but then not stopping and continuing to iterate and ideate and seek success through other pathways. Can you speak a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. And I share the Mr. Holden story because I'm going to tie things back to that as well, where it is the strengths. And I really appreciate you summarizing that back and pulling those parts out, because in talking to several people that have spent their entire careers and have PhDs in this space, the difference of someone being successful or someone going down that bad path and getting expelled is that one person. So all of you on this call can be, and probably have been, that one person. Just the fact that you're here right now listening to this, right? So for Mr. Holden, he pulled out and he said, look, you're very creative, and you have leadership skills. And those are two of the identified strengths. When I went back for my master's degree, I tried to get my MBA because I worked for GE Capital, and everybody was saying you need a master's in finance or an MBA. I couldn't pass the GMAT to get into a master's program. And one of my friends who was familiar with design thinking said, you think like a designer, your brain works like a designer. You should really go and apply to SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design. And I looked up their program, and for as design management and innovation, but it's basically all the principles of design thinking, where it's divergent thinking and it's ethnographic research and it's studies in empathy. And I was like, wait, they have classes in these things? And it just, again, it's like goosebumps moments where I'm like, wait, these are things that I'm passionate about and I didn't know about it. So I like sharing that message as well, that there isn't just one standardized corporate approach. There's degrees in anything that you're passionate about. And so I applied, and my wife is born and raised in Japan. I've tried to learn Japanese at this point for 15 years, because I was applying, after I was already in the workforce and married for about 15 years. And I had taken lessons at the university when I was there, as well as private lessons and tutors. And my wife is Japanese, but I couldn't learn Japanese. And I came up with a very visual and verbal way to learn and teach myself different mnemonic triggers. And I had had about 150 of them, and I had submitted 5 of these words in my portfolio, because when you go to art design school, you submit a portfolio instead of having to take a standardized test, which is phenomenal. And the dean called me and he said, I'm looking at your application, and I've been trying to learn Japanese for 10 years, and I've tried all the same things that I had tried, and it wasn't working for him. And he said, where did you find this? And I said, no, I created this over the last 15 years of trying to teach myself. And he said, well, this is the design thinking process. And he offered me a scholarship. And before I could even ask. And then in classes, I was getting straight A's for the very first time. And like I said, it's the flexibility, it's divergent thinking, it's resilience, it's self-awareness, it's a lot of emotional intelligence, it's different ways of communicating. So if you think of everything that's standardized, it's everything that's not that. And we'll probably get into this as well, but AI is very neurotypical thinking, because it's taking everything historically that fits into that box and crunching that data and that information and spitting it back out, but it's still very inside that box. So the future skills, World Economic Forum has recognized that the top skills on the rise and the top skills, 2027 match. They don't say this, but just knowing the two, they match up and align. So creative thinking, analytical thinking, technical literacy, curiosity, open-mindedness and lifelong learner, resilience, flexibility, agility. This is what the World Economic Forum says are the top skills of the future, but these align perfectly with top skills of neurodivergent people. So that's also the message, not just to corporations to empower your neurodivergent people, but it's also hire them, even though we might come across a little bit awkward in our interviews, or we might have a little bit of a grammatical error in our resume. The amount of talent that you have in these skills that you can't get out of technology is what's recognized and needed. I'm going to ramble a little bit, so if I go off topic, just keep me back on.
You're great. I appreciate so much. I am very comfortable with rambling, because the beautiful thing is that you are kind of weaving together our understanding, but also helping us to empathize with your personal stories as well as your professional ones. And I guess I have one more question, which is, how can your personal experience help to shape our understanding of what our responsibility is in terms of cultivating inclusion and diversity in the workplace? How has your personal experience shaped, your approach, but also how does it shape perhaps our, we call it kuleana in Hawaii, right? Those are the rights that we have that emerge from the responsibility that we shoulder.
Yeah. couple areas to touch on. One, the rights that we have is no one should have to self-identify. So if someone chooses to self-identify, for example, when I first identified, and it was through one of our employee resource groups at work, it was called People with Disabilities Network. We've recently renamed it to Enabled, in capital A, to focus on the ablement network. I only shared that I had dyslexia. And then when I received positive support and other people reaching out to me, because I was one of the first employees to personally share their story, and I did it as a learning leader. So I said, look, if there's anybody that's should be fearful of losing their job, it is a learning leader with learning disabilities, or I call them differences. And the fact that I didn't lose my job, other people would direct message me and say, thank you for sharing. I have X, Y, or Z as well. And then the more comfortable I got, so I have dyslexia, ADHD, dyscalculia, which is like dyslexia with numbers, so math isn't good for me either. And all that goes into psychological safety, and mental health. So I also have high anxiety from having to hide this my entire life. So I would say, if someone's comfortable disclosing, great. If they're not, they don't have to. And this goes back into creating that culture of inclusion, because everybody means to do well. I was a practical joking punk on the outside, but I didn't want to be, but that's how I had to socially fit in. And yeah, I will mess up on emails at work. And during the pandemic, I had to send out an email to about 1,000 people, and I had someone proofread the entire body of the email, but they didn't proofread the subject line, which said, "Thank you for your patience." And I spelled patience incorrectly. And then I got about 60 emails back that letting me know that. So no one should have to self-identify, and then focusing on the strength. So if you see someone struggling with something, it's how can I help you? How can I make your job easier for you? Or is there something that I can do to help? Just being a kind human is fantastic, and it goes a very far way. It's being empathetic, and generally if you have a inclusive culture, people will be more comfortable sharing. Other things I ask people, and I share the Mr. Holden story, it's really do what he did for me, which is we don't always know what our strengths are. It's sometimes harder to self-identify them. So if you identify someone's strengths, then point them out to them and positively reinforce their strengths. Oh, I love it when you do this. Or can you help me with this? I've noticed you're really strong in that area. And then the collaboration really builds, because a lot of people came to me and said, hey, I'm stuck on something. Can you help me solve it? And I love doing that. And then I could go to them and say, hey, can you help proofread this email before I send it out? So if you see roadblocks, help remove them. Have an open mindset. And we don't have to be coaches and mentors. So I like the word guide, because you can be a guide for your peers. You don't have to be a coach or mentor. So Mr. Holden was a guide for me, even though he was a teacher, and then we just show empathy, try to empower people where you can. And then, if there are stories that you want to share to help inspire others, sharing is very therapeutic. And when you share, you own your narrative. And by taking control and owning your narrative, like the person that said Josh might not graduate high school and don't count on college to my parents in the second grade, I was able to take that power back from them that I had given them the majority of my life, because that resonated so deeply with me. But when I started to tell my Mr. Holden story of a new voice of authority, my paradigm shifted to Mr. Holden and focusing on strengths. Does that help answer the question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the questions, which is similar, but just from the other side, because I think you've been talking mostly about, how we can support neurodivergent individuals, making sure that they don't have to, come out and self-identify unless they're comfortable, that sort of thing. Can you give a little more advice, perhaps, although again, you've started this, to neurodivergent individuals who might be early in their careers, and maybe they're struggling to find environments where they are properly supported, or environments that just recognize and appreciate their strengths. And what would you advise they do?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So I have had the honor of working with a number of different universities, and University of Connecticut has a great network where they have, that's the university that my company partners with the strongest. So I've built a strong relationship with them over the years. But they have 100 different universities that have neurodiversity programs, and they're actively seeking companies that also have neurodiversity programs or are interested in hiring neurodivergent students. So there are many companies out there that, if you want to know if it's safe or not, first of all, they should have a DE&I team, and they should have different diversity networks or employee resource groups or business resource groups. They're called a couple different things. And for us, we had one, like I said earlier, that was called People with Disabilities Network. And it was a lot of caregivers of people with different types of disabilities, but neurodiversity was not a focus until I shared my story and kind of proved that it was safe to share. So it is, I'm not encouraging anybody to be that first person to go out there and do it on a broader scale. But for example, I started off with my friends and, hey, can you help proofread this email that I need to send out, or this document that I need? And I wouldn't share why at first, but then they're like, this, I was like, how was your English? Or we'd have different conversations. And when I was comfortable and it was more friends, I'd be like, you know what? English wasn't my best subject. And then it would go to, you know what? I am a little dyslexic. And then eventually it's like, no, I'm severely dyslexic. And honestly, I still probably read it around a 5th grade level. So I'm really good at skimming things. But if you send me a full book or an essay, I'll just pick certain parts of it out. So it's find your safe spaces, find your environments that are safe. If there are employee resource groups, even if it's not one that focuses on learning differences or neurodiversity, it's still going to be people that you're comfortable with, and you're going to have conversations that aren't your typical business conversations. You're going to talk about topics that aren't talked about in conference rooms, in those different meetings. And then if you do, or if you are comfortable bringing up, hey, could we ever talk about neurodiversity as a topic? You could do that. The other thing that I tried to do was make a documentary where there's a longer version, which is like 35 minutes, and a shorter version, which is about 15, where it's myself and 2 other neurodivergent people talking about kind of growing up, and what it was like, and why we would mask and how it was difficult. But then all the failures and all the troubles that we had to go through as a kid now turned into strengths. Some of the ones that I mentioned before that make you very successful in the workplace. And those are the skills that are very highly coveted at the workplace. And what I've done with a couple different companies was I would play the 15-minute documentary, and then I would just open up a panel or a Q&A session, so that at least the conversation started there and the individual didn't feel like they had to do it themselves, or they didn't have to self-ID. So it was kind of allowing a tool for the topic to be brought up, if you would.
Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
thank you for creating that documentary and bringing it into a number of different spaces. So I want to talk a little more about a couple of those spaces. So I think that first I'd love to know more and have the audience know more about sort of the international learning and development departments within the Fortune few hundred companies. So maybe speak, if you can, about some of the challenges of building these departments, and how you overcame them. Is it
Yep.
something that others can do? And what do you see as the sort of the hopeful trend
Yeah.
that are sort of shaping the future of learning and development in corporate spaces?
Yeah. And I do want to give some accolades to the University of Hawaii because this is something that the University of Hawaii embraces. It's universal design for learning, which means there isn't one standardized way of learning. It is being flexible on, here's the topic that we need to learn, but how you research it or how you turn in a paper or how you present the information back, it's not just one standardized approach. And um, it just opens it up so that people that learn differently, people that think differently, um, have that flexibility to the methodology that they go from, the materials that they use, the different types of assessments that they can have. And when I was hired in to build out international learning departments, I loved the challenge because where I had gone to college in Hawaii, I already sat in very internationally based classes. And a lot of the times I was in study groups helping out other people teaching the items back, just like the study groups that my friends and I had formed in high school, where it was based on your experiences in your cultures. Let's find some analogies and metaphors and your lived experiences to tie what we're trying to learn at college, as well as in the corporate office space. So one of the things I had to do was teach people overseas how to read and understand US credit reports when they had never lived in the US or didn't understand why we had single family homes and why everybody has a car. So I would travel to these countries and I would grab a handful of people that would always raise their hand, be brave enough to raise their hand and ask questions. And I would ask them, okay, in your culture, what are different analogies that we could use to help people grasp the concepts of these learnings back? So a lot of standardized learning is more memorization based, where what I teach is conceptual based. Neurodivergent people love concepts and stories, big picture. We need to understand something from a couple different perspectives in order to tie it back. Everybody does. It's not just, I don't want to just pigeonhole nerd. Everybody learns best this way. And that's why, from my perspective, I was teaching everybody as if everybody was neurodivergent because that's how I had to learn and I had to present the information. And everybody got it. The other thing is, I make sure, and I did this at first for myself, for my own safety and peace of mind. And it took off where it set a classroom culture where everybody was extremely collaborative, and it was my ground rules. So my first ground rule that I use at universities as well as in the corporate is no judgment. This is a judgment-free zone. And that means no judgment of self as well as no judgment of others. I borrowed from improv the term yes and it's we're going to build on each other's ideas instead of saying no, but finance wouldn't go for that, or no, but risk wouldn't go for that, or no, but we wouldn't be able to do in that time frame. It is yes and build on each other's ideas. And this was one of the things that I learned in design school is you go divergent first. You take your concept that you're trying to focus on and you just throw it out there and you go at it from as many different divergent areas as you can. And the beauty that I realized later is the word divergent thinking is the second half of neurodivergent. So, neurodivergent people are really good at divergent thinking. And then you can go convergent and say, all right, out of this big pool of ideas, what do we scale back on because of time and budget and resources? So you're really using that design thinking concept And I loved that. I didn't see it as a challenge. I saw it as a game. So going and traveling internationally to teach in different cultures and learn more about their cultures in order to teach things back, it was magic. I absolutely loved it.
I love that. Starting with divergent and then getting convergent. It's such a simple redirection, isn't it, of our attention and our value, but effective. So I have three other questions. And then we're going to give it to the audience. And I already see a great question in the chat from our audience. So not to worry, we're going to get to that in the last 15 minutes. But I would love for you to share with us a little bit more, like other ways perhaps that you take the lessons of the workplace and corporate environments and you adapt them to universities, because you have worked with so many
Hmm.
academic environments, and key lessons you've learned. You mentioned already University of Hawaiʻi and the things that we are doing and championing, and I'm so grateful about that. But what are some of the key lessons you've learned from working with both students and faculty around inclusion at these institutions? And how do you think educational institutions can better prepare students,
Mhm.
particularly divergent students, for the future of the workforce?
Yeah. One of the things that you had mentioned in my bio was the work that I did with Yukon Center for Neurodiversity. Was we built out a neurodiversity career experience program in 2023, and we did it virtually over 6 weeks. In 2024, we just wrapped it up, where it was 2 days, and it was at the University of Illinois with about a dozen autistic students and about 20 employees. And we just did our retrospective on that, and they're going to launch this, throughout with that, where they were saying all the different partners that they have, both university and corporate. The things that we learned were, we approached it through our own diversity network as well, where we already had people that were engaged and interested in the topic of neurodiversity. And we put them through a short training on what neurodiversity is and what to expect and how to interact, how to be open-minded. And it's basically just caring and empathy are at the source of that. Everybody means to do well. And we had a couple of subject matter experts that could walk people through, here's the stages of my career. And then we had some mentors that we paired people up with as well, so that you could just really get to know the person at a deeper human level. A lot of times, I think what we don't know kind of scares us, makes us uncomfortable. And especially in the corporate or sometimes in the university setting, we don't want to look like we don't know what we're doing. So we try to avoid those situations. So I would say if you can create an environment, so even at colleges and universities, I know that there are some that have a neurodivergent club, or a neurodifferences club, where people can kind of get together, and there's strengths in numbers. And again, you can share your stories and you can help build out. And then other people will eventually you can invite a friend who, whether they're neurodivergent or not, and build out allies. And the more experience and the more exposure that you get, uh, just socializing or working with neurodivergent people, the more comfortable you'll be. I do think that there is a little bit of a stigmas or biases or discomfort in, well, what if it's awkward? What if you know what? It's going to be awkward. Who cares? They're human. It's fine. And you might laugh about some of these awkward things. There was a really beautiful moment when we did um, the neurodiversity career experience program, where one of the students and their mentor were paired up, and they were supposed to just talk for 15 minutes. And the student said, you know what, we've been inside all day. It's a beautiful day outside. Can we just go for a walk? And the fact that they just went for a walk and they were willing to change their environment and not do everything so standardized and they had an open mindset. He said that was the best walk. He said it was the best one-on-one, because a lot of times, there's many different types of neurodiversity, but people with autism or who are on the autism spectrum, eye contact can be difficult, and trying to have those social norms can be difficult. Walking with someone side by side takes all that away. And it's not, I have to sit still, I have to sit up straight, I have to pay attention. It's funny, I love virtual because I have fidget toys right underneath my screen. So I can sit here and play with the fidget toy. Yes, thank you. I see, yes, the guest has the fidget toy as well. And, other than if you hear the clinking, you might not know what it is. When I was doing classrooms, I would bring in fidget toys and put them on the tables. And, everybody from managers all the way through chief officers would look at it and be like, what is that? Are there kids coming in here? I'm like, no, they're for you, because there's also kinetic thinking, which helps engage different parts of your brain. And it's like, this is a fun and inclusive learning environment. In order to prove that, you can play with these fidget toys to prove it. The other thing are senior leaders, like senior champions. The person that went on the walk with this student was a chief officer at our company. And it didn't matter if he was a chief officer, or it didn't matter if, he was a manager. It's being human and having empathy are really the big things. I can't stress that enough.
Thank you so much. And I think I would love walking into a meeting and seeing a bunch of fidget toys on the table, even if I am not neurodivergent, because
right.
so many of us are, as you say, enabled or inspired by kinetic thinking, and somatic movement and energy flow helps us to I think probably unclear or get unstick sometimes stuck energy, right?
Yeah.
To clear, not unclear. But I'm going to just ask one more question, because I want to make room for the audience's questions, and then I'll get back to a final question if there is time. My last question is, about technology, because I do think that education is changing, our workplaces are changing, both are incorporating new technologies. And I would like to perhaps ask you what some of the emerging technologies that you believe in, or that you believe will have an impact on learning and development might be, and especially, of course, for neurodivergent individuals.
Yeah, thank you. One of the companies, not a sponsor or anything like that, but it's one of them that I've come across that I've noticed a couple different large organizations getting it for all of their employees. Once again, no one has to self-identify if you do, but it's called Text Help, and it has a read-write tool. And in that, you get it and you put it on your desktop, laptop, anything. And it has a toolbar across the top, and there's like 8 different tools within that, and it's for everybody. You don't have to be neurodivergent, but what it does is it gives you kind of a suite of different accessibility or ease of access, or different tools that, even if you're looking at code all day or long documents all day, where you can just clear out, and wherever your cursor is, or it will just kind of highlight that area, and it will block the rest of it, just for eye strain. So it doesn't even have to be for neurodivergent people. And the companies that have gotten this for everyone, and just everyone can upload it, like I said, no one should have to disclose. There are some companies that will say, yeah, we'll get, I don't know, 200 licenses, and as people ask us and tell us that they need it, then we'll do that. That is one approach, but if you can get something, it doesn't have to be that. That's just an example. Why I like that one is it was originally built for schools and universities, specifically for neurodivergent people. And then there was someone that was using it at a school that said, hey, can we use this at a corporation as well? And they're like, sure, I guess so. And then that's kind of taken off from there. So there are those accessibility tools for everyone, not just neurodivergent people. The other thing is artificial intelligence is going to be great because in talking with some of the schools, professors, um, especially with some of the international students, they would go to the professors or they would go to the assistance programs and have professors or assistants proofread their rough drafts. Now they can, if it's their original rough draft, depending on the school and the program, they could put that into artificial intelligence and have them just simply proofread it. So it's still their own original work, but now all the grammatical, punctuations and capitalizations, and the other thing are what I did with the word patience. So I spelt patience correctly, but it was the wrong definition of patience, which spell check doesn't catch. So that helps save the professor lots of times, or whoever the person from the resource center that was going to help proofread that, just do a lot of the editing. So just to kind of quickly hit on that, there are definitely different ways and different tools out there and still emerging that neurodivergent people can use in different ways.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's good to know. All right, I'm going to ask some questions that are coming from the audience. First is, how can folks see the documentary that you produced?
Oh, great question. I will put a link. Let me see. So I'm going to put a link to my website, and on that website, there is a section for the documentary. Like I said, there's two documentaries. There's the short version, which is more for companies, and then there's the director's cut, which more for families because it talks more about kind of growing up in the public school system at first, and then the strengths come later. So there's a link to the website. It's called neurocreatives.org.
And thank you for saying that, because those who are watching this recording after today's session won't necessarily be able to see the chat.
Okay. Yep. So neurocreatives.org. So
beautiful.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. All right, so this is a poignant question and a complex one. I've self-disclosed to my employer before, and it went really badly, and I got treated badly after. Have you seen anyone who has disclosed their neurodivergence publicly, like say posted a video or put it on LinkedIn or something, and it has been a good thing? Or has it always been a career killer? Considering the consequences, if I decided just to live openly instead of hiding, I've been told that a lot of neurodivergent kids don't have enough neurodivergent adults to see in the world. And so that would be, something good, but I'm torn given the consequences.
First of all, thank you so much for posting that and sharing your story on that. It's very difficult to do so. There's a lot that goes into it. I'm very sorry that you were treated that way. And yes, I have seen that. And that's where earlier I was saying, start off small, build with your group of friends, kind of build some allies, people that you're comfortable sharing with. Some companies aren't ready to open up that yet. Some companies that I've talked with are like, yeah, but that's kind of Pandora's box. Once we open that up, we don't know what's going to happen and what we have to do. Accommodations are very simple. Text help is awesome, but you don't have to get something like text help for all your employees. Having a safe space, even if it's an employee resource group where people can talk and share stories and share resources and help each other out, is a great way to start. And I've had bosses within an inclusive company that the bosses they're like, yeah, that doesn't really exist, or yeah, that's not really a thing, or I don't want to hear those excuses from you. I've heard these personally. So I'm like, okay, not a great boss. I will deal with them as long as I have to, but I will work with the sources and resource groups and other things in the meantime. as far as the students not seeing other people as well, that once again, that's why I made the documentary. There's 3 of us in there that all have dyslexia and ADHD, and then some others. And for myself, I'm a VP of Learning and Development at a Fortune 200 company, and proudly, I will admit this now, it took me a while, dyslexia, ADHD, dyscalculia, and high anxiety. And yeah, my reading and writing isn't solid, my math isn't solid, but all my other skills and strengths were able to make up for that. And then my resource groups and my friends were able to help proofread things or double check things where I needed it. If you are out there looking for companies or how your company can be more inclusive, you can start from the ground up with building out employee resource groups. The other thing is, if you can get a senior leader to self-identify or even share that it's a safe place and share a personal story, maybe it's a relative, maybe they're a caregiver. That's what we did in our company. We had it was our chief marketing officer that had self-identified, and I was leading learning and development for the marketing organization at that time. I'm like, well, if he can self-identify, then it's safe for me to do it as well. And so that's another way, is if you can have a senior leader kind of champion it to get that momentum going and prove that it's a safe place.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I mean, and part 2 to that is, there's another comment, which is that, that this person was a high performer, long-time worker, and the boss was bullying in a number of ways. So the data point or experience with disclosure might be a little bit skewed. But at first there was this statement that, oh, wonderful, yes, we love diversity, but then the boss started talking to this person like they could not comprehend anything and blaming all of the communication issues on this person. So people are, sometimes in their reactions, point being, not always being honest. But then, if they have the capacity to make your life unhappy then at work, then their true feelings can come out. And I feel like this is connected a little bit to one of the other questions on here, which is, has anyone experienced being told that their neurodivergence was deliberate? This kind of the connection I'm making is that sometimes people have the lack of understanding. They will present one way to you at the workplace, seem to be supportive, but then really have these strange beliefs that, that you're doing something deliberate to, whether it is for attention or for alleviation of duty or what have you, or they can pretend to be supportive, but then behave in ways that are contrary to that. So can you share a little bit about, what to do when there's not real clarity or honesty about feelings?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, it does happen. I've experienced that myself. And I've had people say, well, you can't be neurodivergent, you're a learning leader. Or you can't be neurodivergent, you have a master's degree. And I treat it just like, and I'm going to use the word ignorance. And, there are biases out there, conscious or unconscious, unfortunately. And we just know that, okay, until that person chooses to rethink, I'm pretty much going to ignore them as much as I can and leave them alone. I always see it as, you're safe or you're not safe. I would deem that person as not a safe person. And I try to do a lot of networking where I find safe people. I find allies. There's strength in numbers. I also talk to a ton of different HR people to find out, okay, who are safe HR people? And you can go to them and say, hey, look, I don't know, I don't necessarily want to get this person in trouble, but if they're treating me like this, I don't know how many other people they're treating like this. And this was a situation that just happened. It made me feel very uncomfortable. And, I don't want any repercussions back on me either. So we at our company had an unconscious bias training. I'm like, can this person and a bunch of other managers go through an unconscious bias training just so they're not, identified as a target? But I've always made friends when I was in school, it was with a bunch of professors to find out who are my allies and if they could give me advice. And if it's in a corporate, a bunch of HR people and the DE&I team as well, to say, hey, here's a situation. I'm not going to give any names, but how can we help prevent this from happening? Or what can I do to help prevent this from happening? Because each corporate and school culture is going to be a little bit different, and their policies and procedures are going to be a little bit different. But know who your safe people are and just kind of ask for different advice in different situations.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Shana was saying here that it can really carve out bias for the rest of life. And
Yeah.
I can still remember how it made me feel and think of myself and how I view others, so that lack of safety, that real vulnerability. And I wonder, what advice do you have for neurodivergent people, just in sort of emerging from this question, to bolster confidence, to make, to know your value, to kind of bring personal peace? What would you say has been helpful for you and others you've known?
Yeah. So look, I believe in all of you. So for me, and however many people are on this call, I can't see the number. Everybody here on this call believes in you, and they are there to support you. People are on this call specifically to learn more about it, to be more educated, to learn ways to support. And the Mr. Holdens that are in your life that point out your strengths, and believe them. Like, we have so much self-doubt and we have imposter syndrome, and we've been masking and hiding that it's hard for us to believe sometimes that we have strengths and value when society has told us that we don't. But you do. So have an open mindset about yourself. When I say my number one ground rule is no judgment, it's no judgment of self and no judgment of others. So allow those voices in. Here's the thing. It's what voices are you giving power to? Are you giving power to the people that are not safe? Like for me in the second grade, when the person said, I might not graduate high school and don't count on college, I gave them that voice power for too long until Mr. Holden came along. And even when he came along, I didn't believe it until my GPA started to go up and I started to see success. It doesn't happen overnight, but know whose voice that you're given power to. Find those Mr. Holdens and surround yourself with them, and know that you are enough and your strengths are fantastic. And it's what the world needs. And it's what the World Economic Forum has identified as the job skills that are needed of the future, because AI can do all the neurotypical thinking. We really need the neurodivergent brains. And everything that you struggled with and that was difficult is going to make you that much more successful. So, everybody that here is supporting you and believes in you.
Thank you so much. There's an interesting final question here. And some great comments as well. Hoping that we can find a way to bring this topic to more educational and business associations and conferences here in Hawaii, because it's so important to encourage the inclusion we need. And how there are sometimes offerings in the workplace and trainings. However, the people who really need to learn to be open and to reflect and to address their bias are not there. And so we do need to kind of perhaps create spaces where this is not only encouraged but mandated, and where we can kind of bring our whole community and extended ohana. So thank you. The last question, which is an interesting one, which is it, you know, has this ever been used to address dementia? And I guess we can, this person, Jenny, has also said thank you for your wisdom and inspiration. But this idea of neurodivergence being applied to people who are struggling perhaps with other neurological challenges, but who still have a lot to contribute, to community and to spaces, and where we can help to. It's a question that strikes me as important, thinking through like how can we create space for people who are facing a myriad challenges, and their communities and families who seek to love and support them and to have opportunity for a real connection.
Yeah, great question. And thank you for bringing in other facets like dementia into it. And I think it is like you were saying, Maya, it's about building a community, having that understanding, knowing that even though you have something that is difficult or causes difference, that you definitely there's so much still to offer. I've never touched on it specifically with the dementia aspect, but what I do hear time and time again from quote unquote neurodiversity experts is that we still don't know everything yet, right? So a lot of, I'd like to say I'm a thought leader versus an expert because we're still learning and we're always going to continue to learn. The nice thing now about having technology is there's different chat groups, there's different support groups that are out there, not just for neurodiversity, but it could be for dementia or other things out there as well, where you're going to have people that have had experiences, lived experiences that can talk to it and can share their stories. And honestly, if there's, like I said before, when you share your story and you own your narrative, it helps you with a deeper understanding, but it also helps others because I think you said it might have been Jenny or something, but Jenny, if you share your story, it will help others gain a deeper understanding and build a community around that as well, where someone might have gone through the same thing and they have knowledge that they can share back with you. And I think that goes for everything, whether it's dementia or neurodiversity. It's all about ohana and building that culture and that family around you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are now 3 minutes over, which is okay, but I just want to be mindful of your time and also the limits of our recording. So I did put my email there if I'm hopeful, Josh, that you are willing to answer some additional questions after this. And by all means, reach out to me, and I can send Josh questions and connect you if you are seeking additional opportunities and resources. Thank you so much for this time, and mahalo to all of you for being present and for the many gifts that you bring to our community, our beloved community. So and we hope that you are not only bolstered in your path and purpose, but can also reach down and lift others up and support those who are in need of that champion. Take care. Aloha, everyone.
Aloha. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much.